Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to a very special edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the amazing and impressive catalogue from one of the greatest and most iconic piano trios of all time, and in my opinion, one of the finest bands to ever burst onto the jazz scene in the last 30 plus years. And during this band's existence, they were a major force during the 1990s all the way up to the 2000s, and their music incorporated a number of styles ranging from jazz to classical to rock to pop to even techno. And they were heavily influenced by Bela Bartok and Radiohead. And along the way, they not only picked up a loyal jazz fan base, but also appealed to the rock fan base as well. And whenever you heard this band, you know straight away it was them because they had such a unique and unusual sound that was very conventional. And they used a lot of electronics, effects, and multitracking. And this is a band that I have been wanting to talk about for quite a while now. And I am really excited to be discussing this band's incredible catalogue of albums. And this is a band that, quite frankly, in my opinion, needs no introduction whatsoever. I am talking about, of course, the one and only legendary Swedish jazz piano trio, Esbjorn Svensson Trio, also known as E.S.T. So, Esbjorn Svensson Trio, or E.S.T for short, was formed in 1993 and they were comprised of pianist Esbjorn Svensson, bassist Dan Bergland, and drummer Magnus Ostrom. And they are considered to be one of the greatest and most important piano trios in the last 30 plus years. And the first time that I became aware of EST was back in the 2000s when BBC Two showed a special documentary about EST. And I'm not going to lie, I wasn't initially sold on EST. Technically, I knew all three musicians were outstanding players, but the music to me just didn't really do a lot for me and didn't really appeal to me because I found a lot of their music, at least what I heard at the time, to be very noisy. There wasn't really much grit to it, and at times it just came across as a group of guys just messing about. There wasn't really much structure, and I just didn't feel that EST had much going for them. Obviously, the individuals technically were all brilliant, but I don't know really. I just couldn't really get into EST's music that much, especially when you had other great piano trios like the Chick Corea Acoustic Band and the Keith Jarrett Standards Trio, who were putting out excellent music at the time. But EST, I just really couldn't get into them that much. But then one day, I watched a concert of theirs from Freesat, and they had a special guest sitting in with them, and that was, of course, the legendary Pat Metheny. And I was completely blown away by how good EST really were. And I looked at it like, well, these guys must be good to hang with a true legend like Pat Metheny. So I decided to check out one of their albums and I was instantly hooked. I thought to myself, okay, maybe these guys aren't as bad as I thought they were because what I heard at the time was a little bit leaning towards the avant garde side. But at the same time, you know, there was a lot of heavy improvisation. But I just thought that these three guys together were quite unusual because they weren't really what you would call your standard piano, bass, and drums outfit. A lot of their sound was very heavily amplified and their music was very out there. But the playing and the musicianship of EST just completely won me over. And EST's music was very cinematic driven. It was music you could imagine being used for a movie or a TV show or for a documentary. And their music, while very much rooted in jazz, it could be very laid back, it could be very atmospheric, very heavily experimental, and at times, for the most part, very much rocked up. And their music really took you on a journey. At times, it can be very soothing, and at other times, it can be very unsettling. And for the most part, their music could be downright frightening. You never really knew what you were going to get from E.S.T. And what made E.S.T. so different to a lot of piano trios, they weren't afraid of taking risks. Most trios like to stay within what they're doing and stick to what they think works best. But what made EST very appealing was they were incredibly fearless and were always pushing the envelope and always pushing the boundaries of how a piano trio could work as a three piece. And that's what made me respect EST, not just as players, but as a working ensemble. And their music, as I said, you never really knew what you were going to get from EST. And after listening to their entire catalogue over the past couple of days, you really get to see how much EST evolved. So they started out as a very standard jazz piano trio, and then towards the end they become something entirely different, almost like a mini orchestra. At times they sounded like either a group of 8 to 10 guys or they sounded like a full-on orchestra. And what an amazing band EST were. So for today's special edition, as I mentioned already, I am going to be discussing EST's incredible catalogue of albums, which is a total of 11 studio recordings. And as always, I'm going to be talking about each album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. A very tough challenge because after listening to EST's entire catalogue, there are some outstanding albums. There are some albums that are a little bit strange. There are some albums that are not for the faint-hearted, and there are some albums that are absolute classics. And any of these albums could be a number one or an all-time favorite. This is a very strong catalogue, and as you go through this catalogue, as I mentioned already, you see how much EST evolves. And wow, there's some incredible music from EST. So we're going to start with the first album, and this one came out in 1983, and this one is called When Everyone Has Gone. So this is the first EST album, and this album is a pretty standard jazz piano trio album, but you could clearly hear in the music that these guys were just starting to get warmed up. But it's a really good album. It's a very laid back album, and it's very different to what they would go on to become later on in their career. And the music at times is very laid back, it's very atmospheric. It is a little bit on the experimental side, maybe not as heavy as some of the later albums, but it's very enjoyable and there's some incredible music. And at times it sounds like Lyle May's Fictionary trio recording. At other times it sounds like the Chick Corea acoustic band. And there are even moments where it sounds like the Keith Jarrett Standards trio. But EST are not what you would call a copycat of those guys. They are very much their own entity and they have their own style and their own unique voice. And this is a really good, strong album. And this really helps set the tone for what EST were going to be all about. So, of course, we've got Esbjorn Svensson on piano, Fender Rhodes, Rode D50 and Oberheim. So there's quite a lot of keyboards. And we've got Dan Bergland on acoustic bass, and we've got Magnus Ostrom on drums and percussion. And it's a really good, strong album, in my opinion. And we're just going to have a little quick look. So there they are. Very young guys here, just starting out. So all of the compositions are written and composed by Esbjorn Svensson, with the exception of one track, which was composed by Victor Young. And as I said, it's a fantastic album, and this is the one that really started it all. So we've got the title track, When Everyone Has Gone, which is excellent. Finger Trip is great. Free Fall is brilliant. Stella by Starlight is great. 4 a.m. is excellent. And then we've got the two-part suite, Mohammed Goes to New York, parts 1 and 2. Both excellent pieces. Waltz for the Lonely Ones is great. Silly Walk is brilliant. Tough Tough is great. And Hands Off. Top to bottom, a remarkable album and a very strong debut for E.S.T. And the standouts for me are When Everyone Has Gone, Finger Trip, Free Fall, Mohammed Goes to New York, parts 1 and 2, Silly Walk, and Hands Off. But every track from top to bottom is excellent, and this is the one that really started it all off. And it's not as out there as some of the later E.S.T albums, but there's still some incredible music to get your teeth into. So there you have it. When Everyone Has Gone, an excellent debut album from E.S.T, but the best was yet to come. And the cool part about E.S.T, they were just warming up. So there you have it. When Everyone Has Gone, great album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1986, and this one is called E.S.T Plays Monk. So just like in the name, E.S.T play Thelonious Monk compositions, and it's really cool to hear Thelonious Monk compositions played in the style of E.S.T, and they are still very much a standard jazz trio. And as I mentioned already, as you go through this catalogue, you hear E.S.T slowly starting to evolve, and the playing from all three musicians is just excellent. Dan Bergland, one of the greatest and most underrated bass players out there. The way he is able to play the acoustic bass, which at times almost sounds like an electric guitar, is just excellent. Magnus Ostrom, an incredible drummer who brings a very percussive style to his playing. He's just absolutely incredible. And Esbjorn Svensson, he's not what you'd call your standard pianist. He is a thinking man's musician and an incredible composer. And the sounds he can generate from his piano is just unbelievable. He really knows how to get under the skin of the piano and really make it sound like an entirely different instrument. And at times when you listen to E.S.T, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it can sound like four guys, sometimes it can sound like six, sometimes it can sound like 8 or 10. And that's all just from three musicians. But a lot of it you can hear is Esbjorn Svensson, using a lot of effects and electronics. He's just absolutely an amazing musician, as are Dan Bergland and Magnus Ostrom. So, as I mentioned already, all of the compositions are Thelonious Monk songs. So we got the first track, I Mean You, absolutely brilliant. Then we got Crisscross, which is excellent. And we got the legendary Round Midnight, one of the greatest jazz songs ever, absolutely beautiful. Bem Shah Swing is excellent. Riv Ma Ning is another legendary song. In Walking Bud is great. Little Rooty Tooty is great. Ero Now is great. Evidence, another great song as well, one of the greatest songs ever. And we've also got Crep Skoogly with Nelly. Absolutely brilliant. Top to bottom, excellent stuff. And as I said, it's kind of cool to hear Thelonious Monk songs played in the style of E.S.T. Just absolutely tremendous stuff. And the standouts for me are Round Midnight, Rivmaning, Ero Now, Little Rooty Tooty, and I Mean You. And top to bottom, it's just excellent. There are a couple of tracks that have got string arrangements as well, so it gives it more of a orchestral flavour. But this is just an amazing album. And as I said earlier, E.S.T were just warming up. So there you have it. E.S.T plays Monk, a great follow up to their first album. And as I said, they were just warming up. So there you have it. E.S.T plays Monk. Great album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1987, and this one is called Winter in Venice. So Winter in Venice sees EST continue to evolve, and you can really start to see the seeds planting for EST to become the band that we know. And this album is absolutely excellent, and it's got a number of suites which will go on to become an important part of EST's music, and an absolutely incredible album from top to bottom. So we're just going to have a quick look. There's some creepy imagery from EST. There we are. So all of the music is written and composed by Esbjorn Svensson, with the exception of one co-composition by Esbjorn Svensson, Dan Bergland, and Magnus Ostrom. Later on, E.S.T would go on to become more of a band effort where all three musicians would write all of the music. But holy cow, this album absolutely rocks. So we've got the first track, Calling Home, which is great. Then we've got the title track, Winter in Venice, which is beautiful. At Saturday is excellent. And then we got the four-part suite called Semblance, Light in 3 or 4 movements. So we've got like 4 parts. Absolutely incredible. Probably the standout piece of the entire album. Don't Cuddle That Crazy Cat is a short but very good track. Damned Back Blues is excellent. In the Fall of Things is great. As the Crow Flies is great. And then we've got the second page, which is excellent. And then we've got Hercules Johnson's Lat, which is great. But the whole album from top to bottom is just excellent stuff. And you can really start to see EST slowly starting to hit their stride and really starting to build up their sound that we would come to know them for. And the standouts for me are Semblance Suite in 3 or 4 movements, Don't Cuddle That Crazy Cat, Winter in Venice, At Saturday, In the Fall of Things, the second page, and As the Crow Flies. But the whole album, top to bottom, is just amazing. An absolutely amazing album. So there you have it. Winter in Venice, another excellent album from EST, who are really starting to pick up their game in a huge way. So there you have it, Winter in Venice. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1999, and this one is called From Gagarin's Point of View. Now, for me, this was the album that EST became EST that we know, and it's got some of their most memorable compositions, some of them which would stay in their set list for pretty much most of their career. And this was the album that really started to see things take a major shift. So the first 3 albums, they were pretty much like standard jazz trio albums, all excellent, but I feel this is where EST were really born with this album, and it's just an absolute EST classic in my opinion. So we've got the Return of Mohammed, which is excellent. Definition of a Dog is great. The Chapel is great. The title track From Gagarin's Point of View, which is one of the best tracks of the entire album. Dating is great. Dodge for Dodo is great. Another EST classic. Cornet is great. Subway is excellent. Southwest Loner is excellent. In the Face of Day is brilliant. And Picnic another great track as well. But top to bottom, this is one of the best EST albums, and this was the one that really won me over. And the playing is very unusual, very spacey, very out there, but it's just classic EST all over. And as I said, this was the album they were officially born, in my opinion. And the standouts for me are From Gagarin's Point of View, Dodge the Dodo, Definition of a Dog, The Chapel, Southwest Loner, In the Face of Day, and Picnic. But the whole album, top to bottom, is just an EST classic and one of my favourite albums from EST. So there you have it. From Gagarin's Point of View, an absolute masterpiece from EST. And as I said earlier, they were just warming up. So there you have it. From Gagarin's Point of View, an absolute EST classic in my opinion. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2000, and this one is called Good Morning Susie Soho. So this is another great album from EST, and by 2000, EST had established itself as one of the top jazz piano trios in the world, and they would continue to push the envelope with lots of heavy experimentation and really push the boundaries and take the vehicle of the trio and push it in new directions and take it to places that no other trio had ever been before. And this is an excellent album, lots of memorable tracks. And as I said before, at times EST's music can be very soothing and very pleasing, and at other times EST's music can be very unnerving and very scary. But that's what makes EST so special. They can really take you on a wild journey, and they're very unpredictable. You know, you don't really know what you're going to get from EST, but what you're going to get from EST is plenty of adventurous music. So all the compositions are written by all three members of E.S.T, Esbjorn Svensson, Dan Bergland, and Magnus Ostrom. So we got the first track, Somewhere Else Before, which is a great opener. Do the Jangle is another great track. Serenity is excellent. The Wraith is great, which is the longest track of the whole album. It's like 9 minutes long. Last Letter from Lithuania is excellent. And then we got the title track, Good Morning Susie Soho, which is great. Providence is excellent. Pavan, Thoughts of a Septuagenarian, which is great. Spambrew Limbo is great. The Face of Love, and Reminiscence of a Soul. Top to bottom, a tremendous album from EST, who are just getting stronger and stronger and going from strength to strength and putting out unbelievable music. And the standouts for me are Somewhere Else Before, Do the Jangle, The Wraith, Last Letter from Lithuania, Good Morning Susie Soho, Providence, The Face of Love, and Reminiscence of a Soul. But the whole album is just a masterpiece from top to bottom, and it's just absolutely incredible. So there you have it. Good Morning Susie Soho, another great album from EST. Tremendous album. Really enjoyed this one a lot. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2002, and this one is called Strange Place for Snow. Now, this album, I really enjoyed this one a lot. It really took me on a wild ride. And what I like about EST, which I forgot to mention, is when you think the album is finished, they always occasionally would include a hidden track. So you listen to the last track, and then just when you think it's over, it starts up again with a brand new track which ain't even listed on the album. And I've always liked that with EST. Just when you think, okay, it's finished now, ride's over, EST turn around and say, well, not so fast. We've got one more for you. Are you ready for another ride? And your body is like, I think so. And then they just take you back on a whole new journey. And that's what I've always liked about EST. They always included hidden tracks, which you wouldn't even find on their album But that's what makes EST. They're so unpredictable, and you never really know what to expect from these guys. And I really enjoyed this one a lot. So we got the first track, The Message, which is excellent. Serenade for the Renegade is great. Strange Place for Snow is brilliant. Behind the Yashmak is excellent, which is like the longest track, which is like 10 minutes long. Bound for the Beauty of the South is great. Years of Yearning is excellent. When God Created the Coffee Break, brilliant. And then we've got Spunky Sprawl, and then we've got Car Crash, which, no pun intended, does sound like a car crash. And then you've got like a hidden track right at the end, which is just absolutely unnerving. But really like this album a lot. And when I listened to this one, it almost sounded like a prog rock album. You know, it was so ferocious. It was almost like listening to a prog rock album. It's just really incredible. And EST were always known for incorporating rock elements in their music, and this was no exception with Strange Place for Snow. It's just almost like a rock album. So the standouts for me are The Message, Serenade from the Renegade, Behind the Yashmak, which is probably my favourite track of the whole album. Years of Yearning is great. When God Created the Coffee Break, and Car Crash, which really does sound like one, you know, but really good, strong album, and one of my favourites from EST. Really good album, very solid, very enjoyable, a little bit crazy in some parts, but a little bit rocky in some others. But at its core, there's some really good music. So there you have it. Strange Place for Snow, excellent album from EST, and one of my favourites. I really like this one a lot. Excellent stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2003, and this one is called 7 Days of Falling. So another great album from EST, who by this point had established itself as the jazz band that the rock fans loved, and that's quite rare to see that really, because you have a jazz band that the rock fans absolutely loved, and EST were one of those guys. You know, they were the band that rock fans really appealed to. And the only handful of bands from the jazz realm that the rock fans really liked were bands like Weather Report, Mother Hishnal Orchestra, Return to Forever, and even the Pat Metheny Group to a point as well. They were bands that came from the jazz world, but the rock fans embraced, and EST were definitely no exception. The rock fans absolutely loved these guys, and by this point, EST were playing to rock crowds, which is quite an amazing feat in itself. And 7 Days of Falling is just an excellent album, in my opinion. And by this point, EST were just really on a real high and just putting out some of their best music. So we're just going to have a little quick look. So, some cool pictures there. And a nice shot of the guys as well. So all of the music is written and composed by EST. So we got the first track, Ballad for the Unborn, which is excellent. And then we got the title track, 7 Days of Falling, which is beautiful. Mingle in the Mincing Machine is great. Evening in Atlantis, which is our 55-second track. And then we go straight into the next track, which is Did They Ever Tell Constituteur, which is a great track. Believe, Be Left Below, which is great. Elevation of Love is great. In My Garage is great. Why She Couldn't Come is great. And then we got ODRIP, which is a really good track as well. It's like the closer, which is like 8 minutes long. It's like the longest track of the entire album. But top to bottom, it's a excellent album. And the standouts for me are Ballad for the Unborn, 7 Days of Falling, Evening in Atlantis, Believe, Be Left Below, Elevation of Love, In My Garage, and Why She Couldn't Come. Tremendous album, and this was definitely EST at their peak. Just a remarkable album, and one of EST's most memorable albums, in my opinion. So there you have it. 7 Days of Falling, another great album from E.S.T, who are really getting stronger and stronger with each album. Tremendous stuff. Absolutely love this one. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2005, and this one is called Viaticum, another great album from E.S.T, and this was the album that cemented me as an E.S.T fan. And I remember hearing a track of this on Jazz FM, and I was just absolutely blown away. I thought, wow, EST really won me over by this point because, as I said at the beginning, I wasn't initially a fan of EST. I thought EST were just a group of guys who just messed about. But by this point, with this album, EST really were a force to be reckoned with as a piano trio, and this was the one that really cemented me as an EST fan, and I just absolutely enjoyed this one so much. This was a really good album, and some excellent tracks on this one, all written and composed by Esbjorn Svensson, Dan Bergland, and Magnus Ostrom, and it's just a really good, strong album. There's some excellent material. So we got the first track, Tide of Trepidation, which is great. 88 Days in My Veins is excellent. The Well Wisher is great. The Unstable Table and the infamous Fable, which is one of the best tracks of the whole album. The title track, Viaticum, is great. In the Tail of Her Eye, which is great. Letter from the Leviathan is great. A Picture of Doris, Travelling with Boris, a great track. And What Though the Way May Be Long is another great track as well, which is like the closer. But every track on this album is really strong, very enjoyable, and still a lot of wild stuff in their music, but there's some gorgeous music at the same time. And the standouts for me are Tide of Trepidation, 88 Days in My Veins, Viaticum, Letter from the Leviathan, and A Picture of Doris Travelling with Boris. Just a really good, strong album, and one of EST's best albums ever. So there you have it, Viaticum, another great album from EST. Just absolutely tremendous. Love this one so much. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2006, and this one is called Tuesday Wonderland. So, Tuesday Wonderland, I look at this album as probably one of the darkest albums of EST's entire catalogue, but there's still some excellent music, and I found this album to be quite creepy in some areas. It's a very dark album, but still very atmospheric. There's lots of incredible playing from all three musicians, but this one was quite unnerving and still very enjoyable. But as I said, it's probably one of the darkest albums of EST's entire catalogue. Whereas the earlier albums were quite playful and quite, laid back in some areas. Then later on, they started getting more heavy, experimental, and very out there. This one incorporates all of that stuff, but really takes you in a very dark and brooding place. And don't let the title fool you. It might say Wonderland. This doesn't feel like you're in Wonderland. It feels like at times you're in a nightmare. And that's what makes EST so unique. They're so highly unpredictable, and you never really knew what you were going to get with their albums. And this one is definitely one of those, and it's really good. But I should warn you, it's not for the faint-hearted. There are some tracks that are quite okay. What's going on here? But I like it. It's a really good album, and I think it's one of those albums. It could have worked as a soundtrack for a horror movie, in my opinion. But it's a really good, enjoyable album. So we got Fading Maid, Preludium, which is great. Then we got the title track, Tuesday Wonderland. The Gold Hearted Miner is great. Brewery of Beggars is great. Beggar's Blanket is great. Delors in a Shoe Stand is great. Where We Used to Live is great. 800 Streets by Feet is great. Gold Rap is great. And Sipping on the Solid Ground is great. And Fading Maid, Postilidium is great. as I said, top to bottom, it's quite a dark album, but still very enjoyable, and it's not for the faint-hearted. And the standout tracks for me are Fading Maid, Preludium, Tuesday Wonderland, The Gold Hearted Miner, Delors in a Shoe Stand, Where We Used to Live, 800 Streets by Feet, Sipping on the Solid Ground, and Fading Maid, Postludium. But the whole album, top to bottom, is excellent, and of course there is a hidden track as well at the end, which is quite unnerving, but still very enjoyable nonetheless. So there you have it. Tuesday Wonderland, one of EST's darkest albums, but one of their most enjoyable as well. If you've got that certain mindset for that sort of music, then this is definitely one to listen to, in my opinion. And it can make your hair on your arm stand up, in my opinion, but it's still very enjoyable stuff. So there you have it. Tuesday Wonderland. And tragedy would unfortunately hit E.S.T. as they would sadly come to an untimely end, as pianist Esbjorn Svensson would sadly lose his life and pass away on June 14th, 2008, at the age of 44 years old after a scuba diving accident in Stockholm. And the next two EST albums would be posthumously released in memory of the late pianist. Which brings us to the next album, and this one came out in 2008, and this one is called Leukocyte. Leukocyte is the first posthumous release after the death of Esbjorn Svensson, and it's a very dark album, probably more darker than Tuesday Wonderland. And this isn't a feel good album. You know, this is very dark, very menacing, very brooding, and it's a very painful and deep album. You can really hear the emotion in the music. And as I said, this is an album which you have to be in a certain mind frame to really absorb all of this, because this is a very emotional album. And as I said, it's not for the faint-hearted, and there's some incredible playing from all three musicians. But as I said, this is nothing like the early EST albums. This is quite a powerful album, in my opinion. And all of the compositions are written and composed by Esbjorn Svensson, Dan Bergland, and Magnus Ostrom. So these were tracks that EST recorded just some time before Esbjorn Svensson's death, and wow, it's it's a different kind of album. That's all I'm going to say. And there's lots of sweets, and it's quite uncomfortable. This doesn't make for easy listening, far from it. And EST, although they did do lots of easy listening tracks, this album is definitely not easy listening. This is not something you would listen to with your loved one. This is not one of those kind of albums, but it's still really good. So we got Decade, which is the opener, really good track. Then we got the two-part suite, Premonition, part one Earth and part two Contorted. Then we've got Jazz, which is another great track. Still is another great track. Ajar is another great track. And then we've got the title track, which is the four-part suite, Leukocyte, which is absolutely terrifying. That's all I'm going to say. It's very noisy. It's very dark and quite scary and very unnerving, and it's very heavily experimental. And I'm going to tell you now, this feels like something you could have heard in a horror movie. It's quite scary. So we got part one, Ab Initio, part two, Ad Interim, part three, Ad Mortem, and then part four, Ad Infinitum. No, not the band. Just for those who are wondering. But it's a scary, scary suite. And as I said, it's not easy listening. So if you're looking to hear something like from When Everyone Has Gone or EST Plays Monk, you're not going to find it here. This is quite a dark, brooding album. And the standout tracks for me are Leukocyte Suite, Still Ajar, Premonition and Decade. But I'm telling you now, it's a great album, but I should warn you, it's not easy listening. This is not relaxing music, I can tell you that now. It's very out there. So there you have it. Lucasites, great album from E.S.T. and really captures the spirit of Esbjorn Svensson beautifully, in my opinion. Absolutely enjoyed this one a lot. And I came out of this a very different person. So I should warn you, you know, expect the unexpected. That's all I'm going to say. Great album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2012, and this one is called 301. So this is the second posthumous release after the death of Esbjorn Svensson, and this would be the final studio album from E.S.T. And there are only 7 tracks, but they're really good. And again, this is quite a dark, menacing album. And I remember listening to this, I could hear like sounds of water towards the end, which was quite scary. And just like Lucasite, this is not an easy listening album, but still very good. So all of the tracks are written and composed by Esbjorn Svensson, Dan Bergland, and Magnus Ostrom. So we got Behind the Stars, which is excellent. Inner City, City Lights is great. The Left Lane is great. Houston, the Fifth is great. Free Falling Free, parts 1 and 2 are both great. And then we got The Childhood Dream, which is great. But the ending, quite scary. You're hearing all the sounds of water. Very spooky. So standouts for me are Behind the Stars, Inner City, City Lights, the 2-part suite, Free Falling Free, and The Childhood Dream. But the whole album, top to bottom, is excellent. Very dark, very menacing, very unnerving, but still enjoyable music. All 3 musicians are on top form, and a fitting final chapter in the catalogue of E.S.T, in my opinion. So there you have it. 301, excellent album from one of the greatest and most iconic jazz piano trios of all time. Absolutely love this one, and not for the faint-hearted, in my opinion. Love it. So, which EST album do I think is the best one? As I said at the beginning, they're all different. There are some outstanding albums. There are some albums that are a little bit out there. There are some absolute classics. But if I had to choose one which I think is the best EST album, then I'm definitely going with From Gagarin's Point of View. This was the album, in my opinion, that EST became the EST that we know. Lots of memorable tracks, some that will go on to become mainstays in EST's set list. And I feel this was the album where they really became what we know now. And they were just off to the races from there. The earlier albums are all great. They're pretty standard jazz trio albums. But for me, From Gagarin's Point of View was the one where they completely transformed into something totally different. And it's an absolute classic, in my opinion. EST's best album they ever put out. And this would pretty much set the tone for what EST would go on to be about. And, all of the other albums are excellent, but for me, this is the one that really stands out, in my opinion. So there you have it. From Gagarin's Point of View, for my money, the best EST album ever, in my opinion. An absolute classic. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite EST album? Is it When Everyone Has Gone, EST Plays Monk, Winter in Venice, From Gagarin's Point of View, Good Morning Susie Soho, Strange Place for Snow, 7 Days of Falling, Viaticum, Tuesday Wonderland, Lucasite, or 301? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below. And I will see all of you next time for the 200th edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series in celebration of the 5th anniversary of the series. So make sure you don't miss that. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.